Hi there. Today I want to walk you through the process that I take for taking sketches like this, cleaning them up, and getting them ready for presentation. Some of the first tips I have are to use clean paper where possible, because if you draw on something like this, and you draw, fairly lightly, it's gonna be difficult to separate what you've just drawn from the background when you bring it into Photoshop. So if you use a purely clean white background or really clean paper, like over here, it'll be easier for you to separate them from the background. The second tip I would have, coming from that, would be to draw fairly strongly. If you're sort of sketching some line and you say, yes, I absolutely want that line, you can draw over it fairly strongly. That provides the contrast from the background. So again, when you bring it in Photoshop, it will be easier to separate that and make the background white. And along those lines, if you can, try and use pen over the top. That's the ultimate. Yes, you can't erase pen, but if you draw by pencil first, and then you can take another piece of trace paper and go over that. Because when you have pen, it scans in very clean as a dark line. And this has the added advantage of being able to be vectorized later if you want to. And this will be covered in a later video. On top of this, I would highly recommend trying to erase any sort of smudges or background mess on the paper before you actually start to scan it. It'll just be quicker to use a manual eraser with a sharp edge to go exactly where you want and remove those that mark than trying to do it in Photoshop, which will save you a bit of time. To save more time before you scan, it's a good idea to just gently brush off the page that you've just drawn. That can help get rid of things like that, bits of hair, little bits of dust, pencil rubbings, that type of thing. It can easily save you some time just with a quick blow or a brush. If you're drawing a base layer and you know that you're going to be putting one or more trace layers over the top of it using trace paper, it's a good idea to put identifying marks which you can use to line up each layer on each layer. So for example, this is the base layer. I've put a cross in each of the corners, or 3 of the 4 corners, and then on the trace paper above it I have drawn in the crosses right above where they were on the drawing underneath, so that when I scan that trace layer in, I can quite easily line it up with the scan underneath. So using the crosses, I've been able to line up the bottom layer and the layer above it as I drew them. The next tip I have is a little bit unintuitive, but if you are more comfortable with sketching or drawing, it is to work in a direction that starts from the opposite side of your drawing hand towards the side of your drawing hand. Like for me, because I'm a left-hander, I would start on the right-hand side of the page, draw what I need to draw, and then come gradually over towards the left-hand side of the page. And that means that my wrist will not go over the area that I've drawn and cause this type of smudging, which is harder to clean in post-production. But if you want to, you can also try putting a piece of paper under your wrist, so that when you rest your wrist on the page that you're drawing on, you will have something between your wrist and the paper, and it will cause less of this smudging. So if you're a right-hander, you start on the left-hand side of the page and you gradually work your way across to the right-hand side of the page. For this part, I want to talk about the different types of paper or sketchbooks that you might be using and how they can affect the scan. Here you can see with this double-sided A4 sketchbook that I'm having a couple of issues. One of the issues is there's this darkness in the middle towards the spine. Another issue that occurs is this darkness over here, or this waviness. To explain that, I've drawn a couple of little sketches. On the flatbed scanner, you have this A4 sketchbook facing down on the glass. In its natural state, when you buy the book is closed. And for you to then open it and force it flat down on the glass like this, the spine part of the book wants to close the book. And so you get this waviness up here. So this very middle point and close to the middle point is really not going to want to touch the glass. And that's why you get, this distance from the glass causes the darkness, and that's what you want to avoid. So to avoid that, it might be best to use an A3 sketchbook where everything is scanned at the same level and you don't have the part in the middle that wants to stay away from the glass. The cause of the waviness over here is that, say for example, a book like this, on one side of the book you might have more pages than on the other side of the book. Like it might be 30 and on this side you might only have 2 pages behind the page that you've drawn. So then what happens is the force down from the top of the flatbed scanner onto your book will be giving more force to the side with more pages and less force to the side with less pages. And then what happens is that paper might actually come up away from the glass because there's not enough force to push it against the glass. And that's how you get this type of waviness. So again, another advantage of using an A3 sketchbook, which does not have the spine in the middle and has an even pressure across the whole back of the book. To get the best out of your flatbed scanner, I would suggest giving it a good clean first. To do that, use some commercial glass cleaning agent or some isopropyl alcohol. Get a nice microfiber cleaning cloth which will not leave hairs, and then apply a bit of the agent onto the cloth and rub in a circular motion on the glass until it's as clean as it can be, and also do the same for the backing page. Once you've done that, let it dry, get a rocket blower or something similar, and just blow that dust off if there's any dust. If you are scanning the page of a book, this step doesn't matter, but if you're using a piece of trace paper, or if you're scanning a piece of trace paper, you've got a couple of options. You can place your piece of trace straight down on the glass, close the lid with the cleaned backing page and make the scan. But if you have a dirty or scratched backing page which cannot be cleaned, what you can do is literally just get a nice piece of clean A3 paper or whatever the size is that you're using, put it over the top of your trace and then close the lid and make the scan. What that will do is that will give you a perfectly clean backing page which will not have any marks or scratches that you have to repair in Photoshop. If you are scanning a double-sided sketchbook, which may have more pages on one side than the other, what you can try to do is put a little bit of thickness on the thin side to match the thickness of your thick side, so that when you push down the scanner and make the scan, it's got even pressure on both sides of the book. You can also put some hand pressure on the lid of the flatbed scanner to give it a better chance of pushing the paper down to the glass evenly. When looking for a scanner, try and find one which can print in A3 and also scan in A3 at least. That makes the workflow much easier. This one here I got because it did that and it was fairly cheap. Now I'm in the Brother iPrint iScan software and I'm going to choose various settings. I've chosen the document size which I'm going to scan, so that's the page size that I drew on. I've chosen 24-bit color because that will give me the best result as opposed to true gray or black and white. You can always desaturate it, make it grayscale after you do the scan, and that will give you a better result. Similarly, I'm going to scan at a higher resolution for archival purposes. Submission is usually at 300 dpi, but you can always downscale your images in InDesign before you export your PDF or whatever it is you're exporting at 300 dpi. But when you scan, it's best to do it at a higher resolution because it leaves the least artifacts in the file that you're going to scan. Now that I've made the scan, I'm going to save the file to my computer. When I save it, I've got several different format options which I can do. After lots of testing, I have chosen JPEG as the best balance between file size and quality. If you choose the highest quality, you can't discern a difference between JPEG, TIFF, and PNG. If I show you here these 3 versions, they're the same scan, they just save as different formats. Put a curves layer to really exaggerate any differences. PNG on top, turn it off, tiny difference. JPEG, turn that off, TIFF, tiny difference. And if you have a look at the file sizes though, JPEG is 2.6 megabytes and the others are close to 15 megabytes. And if you have 600 or thousands of different scans on your computer at 600 dpi, it's really good idea to keep things in an archival format which are not going to take too much space but will have high quality. So now that I have scanned my drawings, I'm going to bring them into Photoshop to clean them up and make them presentable. So I'll drag it in and you can see that it gives me this option to choose a color profile. When you scan, or when the Brother software makes the scan, it assigns a color profile called Brother J16A Scanner RGB. That's a color space which is native to the hardware and the software. It's good to convert it to sRGB. That's a universal format that anything can read accurately. So I usually go convert document colors to the working space. And now we have the JPEG scan imported. and it will come up like this. So I usually have to rotate by going image rotation 90 degrees clockwise, or you can set that as an automation. So what I've done is I've created a little action and I just press play and it does it for me. It sets it up like this, it desaturates it, and it gives me a curves layer which I can directly start working with to get the right contrast. Now that I have got my JPEG scan in Photoshop, I'm going to show you a couple of ways which you can clean up the scan ready to present. The first thing I'm going to do is add a curves layer. With a curves layer, I'm going to take the black point to where it starts to see some data. This is increasing the contrast, which is much easier to read when you're using pencil, which natively doesn't really give you much contrast in a scan. I'm also adjusting the white point so that the areas which I want to be white in the image, such as the edge of the image, are actually 255. That's important because when you take the image over to InDesign to present it later on, you avoid this type of thing. So in the top image, I haven't adjusted the white point, and you can see that down towards the edges of this scan, it's a little bit gray, and you see that edge of the image. Over here, you can see that the white is purely white, and it blends into the surrounds. It's much nicer when it blends from pure white to pure white. You don't see the edge. So now that I've adjusted the white point and the black point, I can maybe add a little bit of a curve, an S-curve, to get the contrast more as I would like it in a global way. We're going to do some local adjustments afterwards as well. So you can see that this part of the image up here is looking better. Now I'm going to merge this as a single layer, and I'm going to desaturate the image because I don't want to have this magenta hue across the image. It doesn't look good. So I go Image, Adjustments, Desaturate. Now it becomes a grayscale image. Now that I have a fairly nice grayscale image, I want to clean up some areas in a selective way. So to do that, I'm going to first create a levels layer. I'm going to bring down the white point to a level that I'm happy with if that was the final image. And what I mean by that is, for example, over here, I want these little parts which are a bit smudgy to appear more white. So I'm going to adjust the white level to about there. I'm going to invert the layer mask with Control-I. I'm now going to take the eraser tool, which is the exact opposite of a brush tool, but I can keep my brush with whatever preset that I have and I don't have to change it. So that's why I use the eraser tool often when I'm changing a mask. So I'm using black as the foreground color of my eraser, and I'm painting on a black mask. And you can see that that starts to paint in that adjustment layer only where I want it to be. And already you can see that it's starting to clean up that part of the image. Now we need to do a little bit more touching up because there's still some issues with this scan. A good way to clean up locally some areas in your image is to get the dodge tool and set it to highlights, set a fairly low exposure, and just start to gently paint in carefully because you don't want to lose parts. It's a compromise here. This is why it's good to get a good scanning habit and a cleaning of the page habit at the very start so that you don't have to do too much in post. To try and remove the spine, I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer. I'm going to lift that curve up until I would be happy with it. I'm going to invert the mask, Control-I. Go to the base layer, select color range, sample colors, start selecting the midtones within your image. Midtones like this. Better to include more than less. Press OK. And now I'm going to get the lasso tool and I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift, and I'm only going to keep the intersected area that I want to affect. So where these two selections intersect will be maintained, but nothing else. Now I'm going to go back to the curves, and then with the background I press Control-Delete, and that applies that background to the selection. If I adjust the opacity a bit. Now, to fix this sharpness on the edge, I can go select and mask. I'm going to hold Shift to give me the old mask. Press feather, something like this. There you go. Okay, that's a lot better, but I want to see if I can make it even better. So I'm going to put the opacity back up to 100%. I'm going to group this layer, create a mask on top of that, and then I can use the eraser again, start painting white because I actually want to remove the effect. Bring the flow right down. So let's say I want to make this more natural. And there you have it. Before, after. It's done a fairly good job, but in principle, try not to work across the spine of a book. To delete the majority of the highlights within this layer that I don't want to keep, there's a neat little trick. Create a duplicate of your base layer, invert that with Control I, create a threshold adjustment layer, bring the threshold down to a level which makes everything that you want to keep white. For this image it'll be about there, 9. Merge that with the underlying inverted duplicate. Now we have a black and white image. Go to Select, Color Range, select the white part, bring your fuzziness up to its maximum. Now you have a selection and you can create a layer mask on your underlying original layer. And you can see that it's dropped out the background very cleanly. If you're happy now with that layer mask, you can right click the layer mask, press Apply Layer Mask, and your layer has removed all of that interstitial information. With practice, this becomes fairly quick. Curves adjustment layer. Adjust the dark point to increase contrast. Bring the white point across to make the white parts purely white. Create a levels adjustment layer for local adjustments. Bring down the white point. We're just going to remove the haze with this. I'm also going to bring up the black point a little bit. Invert the layer mask. Get the eraser tool or your soft brush. With the eraser tool I paint on black because it's the inverted of a brush. And we're getting rid of the haze. And now I can Control Shift F, flatten the whole thing. Control Shift U is to desaturate, make black and white. I can do the threshold dropout method. So Control J, duplicate base layer, invert the base layer. Threshold adjustment layer, bring that down, probably around, this one's a cleaner scan, so it can be up a bit, maybe around 15. Merge that with the inverted threshold, select color range, select the whites, high fuzziness, press OK. Turn that off. Go to your base layer, create an adjustment layer mask, apply the adjustment layer mask, and now you have a clean layer. And with this knocked out layer, you can do whatever you want with the pixels that you have. This drawing was an ideas and concept plan drawn on trace paper over a base plan, and the base plan was printed out at 1 to 2000. So this scan is effectively at 1 to 2000. I want to maintain that scale as I bring that over from Photoshop into InDesign. So if I take this, which is a flattened layer, and I go File, Save As, and I find a location, and then choose JPEG, press Save, press OK, and then I drag this file into InDesign, click it. That's a true scale. It's about 420 mils by 297 mils, the size of an A3 page. What happens if I take just the parts of the image? I only want to export this part which was cut out, this part which was cut out, and this part which was cut out. So I can select them, right click, export as. I can go export, and I'll choose that same folder. Now if I drag this into InDesign and clicked, you're going to see that it's turned out massive. And that occurs because during that export process, Adobe changes the DPI from its original DPI down to 96. Whatever that original DPI was will be lost. It will be changed to 96. Then InDesign interprets that scale and compares it to the original scale. And you can see that it appeared much, much larger. That original file, which was done through the Save As command, is at 600 DPI. So now we've got these three 96 DPI layers. I need to convert them to 600 DPI so they match the DPI of the original scan. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click that folder, go browse in Adobe Bridge, take those layers, and there could be dozens of them, so this will save a lot of time if you're doing that. Right click, open in Adobe Camera Raw, select the items, do the little Save As icon, find a folder, and I've created a subfolder called 600 DPI. Set the quality to 12, set the resolution to 600 DPI, turn off resize, and press save. Now we have a new version which should be identical quality, or almost, and when I drag that over into InDesign and place it, it is the correct scale. That effort using Adobe Bridge would be avoided if Adobe updated the export as function to maintain the original input DPI. So thanks very much for watching. If you enjoyed this or if you found it helpful, please consider liking, subscribing, and if you have any friends who you think might find this useful, consider letting them know.